Shalom, Rastafari. This is December 6th, 2013, and yesterday was announced the passing on of a great man, Nelson Mandela. Right, Nelson Mandela here. We see him right here with his left hand fist up here and reading his life story, and even during the couple of vids that we did as a kind of a tribute from one Rastafari and for other Rastafari who may agree more or less, and if not, you can do your own tribute. I will definitely recommend all the disciples they should do a tribute, right, to Mandela, as well as researching the fact that Nelson Mandela, we can safely and rightly say he was one of the last of a particular generation of the first original Rastafari. Nelson Mandela, Nelson Mandela was one of the last of the first generation of Rastafari. Yes, Nelson Mandela was and is a Rastafari. Many would disagree with that because they're just going on what the media has told them, right? They're going on what the media has told them, and they haven't really researched into this matter, very much so. And because of African unity, there you see Mandela's Ethiopian passport, right? When you recognize the blood, sweat, and tears and the sacrifice of the King of Kings in Christ, and of all the Ethiopians, the faithful and the righteous Africans and righteous people around the world who supported the cause of the King of Kings, and many who have supported the cause of Nelson Mandela. It's very interesting for us to proclaim this, and of course some folks are going to naysay it because they haven't done their own study and research into the fact that Nelson Mandela is one of the last of the original Rastafari, right? And his own words, his own testimony, we don't even have to say it ourselves. Nelson Mandela actually says so with his own testimony, of which I'll show you a little bit right here. Let's bring this page open right here. We just researched on the Google right there, Nelson Mandela Selassie in Ethiopia. And you'll find some of these, and hopefully you can repost them. You can tweet them out. Nelson Mandela's pistol given by Ethiopian Emperor Haile Selassie. Portions of Mandela's gun, quote, Mandela's gun, end quote, documentary to be filmed in Ethiopia. From the Telegraph, we have Nelson Mandela pistol, quote, under home of South African pop star. I don't know what that one is about right there. I opened it, but because we want to archive this, right? Archive this. This is right out there for you to read and study and to know the other half of the story that hasn't been told. Here we have on Arefe Mandela on Haile Selassie, right? He gives you his own opinions on Haile Selassie, on Imperial Ethiopia. The lion inspired Nelson Mandela. Mandela's gun, the gun that Emperor Haile Selassie gave Dr. Mandela. Then we have this, some interesting facts about Ethiopia, Nelson Mandela. That's a video there that we had posted a couple of months ago, when it was thought that he was near. They was basically announcing that he was near death at that time. And we posted these videos: Africa, Mandela's Life, Ethiopia's Lion. There's a new book, and how the King of Kings is an inspiration and was an inspiration. Now, furthermore, a further proof that we have that we want to share with you, that Nelson Mandela was the last of that first generation of Rastafari. After all, he was 95, right? He was 95 years old. So he was born, I was in the 18. Now, this is from an interesting article here. An interesting article. This is one of the articles that found in the search rate here. And let's just go up here. Emperor Haile Selassie, a much watched video. You should check that video out for yourself right there. But this is from who's the writer, Nebiat Aklilu. And let's tilt this right here. The OAU and Emperor, that's the Organization of African Unity. And Emperor, let's close this right here, Emperor Haile Selassie's rightful place in history. Now, notice the last person, major world leader that said so concerning His Majesty's place in world history was assassinated. That was Kennedy at the railway station 50 days before he was assassinated, roughly 50, within about 50, we counted, rounding it off to about 50 days. He acknowledged, the role of His Imperial Majesty and Ethiopia, the righteous Ethiopians, in the liberation struggles that were ongoing, and how Ethiopia was and still is, but very much more was in manifestation, a center of such struggle. Like right here, let's zoom in right here where we have Ethiopian Emperor Haile Selassie in particular played an instrumental role in supporting liberation movements in Africa to ensure freedom, independence, stability, and lasting peace. That explains why many people have such negative, disinformed opinions concerning Kedemawi Haile Selassie, the King of Kings. But many of them would have positive opinions concerning Mandela. So let's see what Mandela himself actually says and what proves or backs up our statement that Mandela is most likely one of the last of the original Rastafari. The original Rastafari, they were not locksmen. They didn't run around just shouting Jah or burning spliffs or whatever else like that. Not to dismiss those who came after within that long walk, as it were, of freedom. The highly adorned freedom fighter and African leader, former South African President Nelson Mandela, to zoom in so you can see it for yourself, he confirms, this assertion as well, Assertion, this is a fact, But they still want to put it out there, even though it's written in his autobiography. In his autobiography, Long Walk to Freedom, President Mandela asserts the significance of Ethiopia and Ethiopianism. Now, Ethiopianism, for some of the Ethiopian audiences, we need to note the fact that Ethiopianism, blow the trumpet on that one, Ethiopianism wasn't developed or perfected in Ethiopia. It was by the Afro-Americans and the Africans, the diaspora in the West, identifying with the Ethiopians, and those Ethiopians who were globally conscious, such as the Emperor, Dagmawi Menelik, Kedemawi Haile Selassie, and many other righteous Ethiopians who built bridges as early as the late 19th century. We're talking about the 1800s. All right. See, these things they don't tell you, but it's out there. Go search it out. Look it up. We don't have the staff or the teams to do it, but those who can, let's archive this information. So President Mandela asserts the significance of Ethiopianism as the inspiration for his political party. Zoom in on that right there. For his political party and the struggle for freedom in South Africa. So Mandela himself states in his auto means that he wrote it or he had it written, not that somebody else just decided to put in and delete ideas they wanted to, but this means that it's based on his own authorization, and his own input. He says right here, the fundamental tenets of the Ethiopian movement were self-worth, self-reliance, and freedom. These tenets drew the advocates of Ethiopianism, or Be'amrinya Ethiopiawinet, like a magnet to the growing political movement. The political movement was to culminate in the formation of the ANC in 1912, right? In 1912. You have it right here in 1912. It is in this sense that the ANC traces the seeds of the formation of our organization to the Ethiopian movement of the 1820s. This is why when Mandela came to New York, he put on that Yankees hat and he says, I'm a Yankee. He didn't say I'm a Yardie, he said I'm a Yankee. But let's just recognize he's still one of the original, the last of the original Rastafari. Right? Prior to the establishment of the OAU in 1962, Nelson Mandela met with Emperor Haile Selassie and explained the plight of South Africans under apartheid rule. Right? During his time in exile, Nelson Mandela received military training in Ethiopia and was provided with a Bulgarian-made handgun. He was also issued an Ethiopian passport and given the chance to re-enter South Africa under an alias name and Ethiopian identity to continue the struggle for freedom and independence. Now, here is where I think the rubber even meets the road more on what we're saying, that Mandela was one of the last of that first generation of Rastafari. You know, that generation coming from he was born 1918, right? I think 1918. So coming from that time, that early time, some say the movement began in 1930, but it didn't begin in 1930 because His Majesty was known as Haile Selassie. We're not known as Selassians, we're known as Rastafari or Rastafarians. Rastaman, in other words. In his autobiography, Nelson Mandela stated Ethiopia always has a special place in my imagination, and the prospect of visiting Ethiopia attracted me more strongly than a trip to France, England, and America combined. Wow. No wonder they don't talk about that in all this. We remember Mandela. Well, we only talk about this sort of full. Let's talk about what was his inspiration, right? Mandela goes on to state that I felt I would be visiting my own genesis, unearthing the roots of what made me an African. You heard it for yourself. Let's zoom in because some might say, so you can see this right up here. Right, where he says attracted me more strongly than a trip to France, England, and America. Right down here, he says visiting my own genesis, unearthing the roots of what made me an African. You can see that right there as well. All right, as the former president of the last African country to gain its independence from white, racist, may I add, colonial rule, and Africa's de facto spiritual leader, Nelson Mandela is unarguably the most respected leader in Africa since Emperor Haile Selassie. Now, some even have tried to argue this down, just ignoramuses, just foolish people. Right? Foolish people. That reminds me when Christ says, ye worship me in vain. You know, like a lot of them talk all these nice things, but you mention Haile Selassie, they're going to get all twisted and everything. They'll get all wicked and everything like that, all twisted, right? You know, they look up to Mandela in vain because they're not really looking at, well, what made him great? What was his focus, right? What was his focus? What was his center? So it says right here, once again, as an African leader of Nelson Mandela's stature, morality, and contributions, despite being deserving of accolades and admiration in his own right, Nelson Mandela demonstrates the utmost respect and deference to the father of Africa, Emperor Haile Selassie and to Ethiopia as his spiritual homeland. The same sentiment about Emperor Haile Selassie and the significance of Ethiopia expressed by Nelson Mandela and countless others in the Black political movement and beyond is also shared by millions of Africans and peoples of African descent around the world. Now, it's going to go forward. There's even more to this, even touching on the Ethiopian World Federation as well, which came from that same 1890s Ethiopianism. So, Selassie, ergo, when we state that Nelson Mandela is the last, or perhaps was, I prefer to say is, right? Because in spirit and in truth, he is still with I and I and I. The last of the original Rastafarians, based on Mandela's own words, based on his own witness, his own testimony. And if you want to see, read more about it, check out The Long Walk to Freedom. So he belongs right up here with, our founding fathers, right? Our founding fathers.